Hello, my name is Mace Hall, and I am here on behalf of the One Lamb Mental Wellness Initiative here at Peachtree Road to have an interview with Joel Bush, who has been a member at Peachtree Road since 1998. We have been focusing recently on the topic of trauma and specific trauma as it pertains to grief. And so Joel has kindly agreed to come and talk about his own experience. You know, when we talk about trauma, a lot of times we go to something really, really dramatic, like a war or a terrorist event or something that is very rare. But the truth is, life presents all of us with some type of trauma. There are difficult situations we each face, and it is a type of trauma that we have to deal with and learn from and ultimately grow more resilient. And so Joel's going to talk to us today about the loss of his wife, Holly. So I really greatly appreciate you coming and talking. So you've been at the church since 1998. How did Holly and you meet?
So yes, I joined the church in February of 1998. I was going through a divorce at that time from my first spouse. I had a very young child that was not quite a year old at that point. And I was in Disciple One, and Holly was in Disciple One with Phil Schrader. Mm-hmm. And we became friends with Phil. I became friends with a group of people in the church who are lifelong friends today, who were in that Disciple One class. And so Phil Schrader said, if any of you, this was in Disciple One, if any of you are thinking about joining the church, I'm preaching on this Sunday in February. And I immediately decided that I was going to join the church then. So that was February of 1998. And Holly and I met during that Disciple One course, January of 98 through probably summer. Mm-hmm.
So, did she join the church too?
She, I think, had already joined the church, is my memory. I think she was already a member and had been a member of the church for at least a little while, maybe not more than a year or two, but had been a member of the church. And I remember she had some friends in the church when I first came to be friends with her in Disciple One.
So did y'all start dating in Disciple One?
No, I was, like I said, I was going through a divorce. That was most of 1998, but we did become really good friends in 1998. And we and a couple of other people from Disciple One joined Disciple Two and did Disciple Two, I think, in 1999. And Holly and I started dating, I think it was July of 1999 that we started dating.
So y'all are dating, and you obviously have very similar values and interests, which is just, you know, how great is it to meet somebody and studying the same subject matter, and you instantly have a connection because...
That's right. We definitely did have a connection. I'm trying to remember. I was prepared to talk about all these other things. I'm trying to remember more about the time that we dated before we got married. I remember when we became engaged in 2001. I remember we were really serious during 9/11, and she was working as a consultant for Accenture. I was a senior associate in a law firm. She was in Charlotte when 9/11 happened and then couldn't fly home. I well remember that. So that was September of 2001. And then we were engaged. We got engaged in December of 2001, and we married in May of 2002.
Wow. So that is, it's just storybook. So y'all met, and you've got a young daughter, and y'all are in love, and you get married. So how long were y'all married before Holly got sick?
So yes, we got married in May of 2002. We moved into my townhome at DeForest Mill until I think the summer of 2003, we bought the house on Cloudland, where I still live. Looking back on it, Holly was not feeling well by late 2003, maybe the fall, maybe the winter of 2003. She had shortness of breath. I remember her complaining about shortness of breath, and she had a redness in her face, a flushing in her face that was intermittent. And a doctor said that's rosacea. It's a skin sort of inflammation. But otherwise you're fine. And she was a runner, and her running was compromised by her inability to have sort of lung stamina is how I remember it. And that intensified around the holidays, and especially around New Year's of 2004. That's what I remember. And finally, she went to a doctor at some point in January or early February of 2004. And in February of 2004 is when I remember her being diagnosed. And we were in a physician's office at Piedmont. He was doing tests on her, and I don't remember the doctor's practice area, but his name was Dr. Dollar. And I remember he ran out to find me. I think she may have been sedated. And he said, "Did your spouse ever take Fen-Phen?" And the diet drug. And I said, "Not to my knowledge." And he said, "Well, her heart valves are very scarred and very, deteriorated in a way that would not be normal for someone her age." She was, how old was she then? 40 or 41. And I said, "No, I can't imagine she's taken that drug." And he said, "Well, I can't figure out then what has caused this scarring to her heart valve." So he immediately said her breathing issue, her stamina issue is attributable to what I think he called tricuspid regurgitation. Her heart valve was not, the valves were not properly, allowing the blood to flow in the right way through the chambers of her heart. And so he immediately said she's going to need to have open heart surgery to repair the valve. So stop me if I'm...
No, I knew you during that time, and I didn't know that the diagnosis started there.
The diagnosis started there, and I'm having a hard time putting together the sequence of how we learned information, but at a very quick pace. In February of 2004, she was referred to 6 or 7 or 8 different doctors, all of whom had a different piece in it. And the net of all of that, the end of all of that, was that she was diagnosed with carcinoid syndrome, which is a form of cancer. And carcinoid syndrome is a really rare cancer, I was told, that not many people have heard of. I remember her oncologist saying, this form of cancer hasn't been blessed with a celebrity having had it and having made it their cause, and so no one has heard of it. He said, good news is people can live with this form of cancer typically for a while. It's very, very slow growing. It isn't as aggressive in its pace as other forms of cancer, though I came to conclude that she had been misdiagnosed and that she'd had this cancer for a while. And the flushing in her face that I described, that was a very classic symptom of carcinoid syndrome, and nobody had put that together before. So briefly, her cancer was some sort of neuroendocrine tumor somewhere in her digestive tract, they told us. They never found the tumor, which really didn't matter because it had metastasized in her liver. So her liver was, a complete mess, and that created other consequences for her physically. But most critically, and I'm not a physician, so I'm getting this wrong, but the artery that goes from the liver goes straight to the heart, and the metastasis in her liver dramatically increased the production of serotonin. And serotonin is a normal hormone that we all use that, is for happiness or different things. But normal serotonin might be a 6 or an 8 metric, and hers was 230. It was a very dangerously high level of serotonin, and that had just run havoc through her body. And my understanding is the really increased levels of serotonin had scarred her heart valves. So very quickly after that, she had a series of hospitalizations for a chemotherapy treatment to her liver. They did a chemoembolization treatment to her liver where she was hospitalized and they essentially injected some sort of chemo into her liver. And that was just horrific. The effect of that and the sickness created by that and the many days in the hospital following that procedure. And she had 7 of those procedures before she passed. They did an open heart surgery sometime in 2004. And I remember the doctor coming out of the surgery and telling me that, well, we thought we only needed to replace or repair the tricuspid valve, but we had to replace both the mitral and the tricuspid valve because her heart valves were so scarred. And so she had to recover from that. And it all is a blur to me now, but, there was a 4-year period. She was diagnosed in February of 2004. She passed in February of 2008. And those 4 years, except for about a 6-month period, were unrelenting medical procedures, hospitalizations, trying to, gear up to go do the procedure and then deal with the procedure and then recover from the procedure. And, even now, I'm embarrassed to say this, even now when I walk in Piedmont Hospital, there are times when I just shake, because I spent so much time there and there was so much confusion and difficulty and challenge around, making certain that she was okay and that she was getting the care that she needed and trying to understand what the different doctors were.
And all the while practicing law and raising a little girl.
And practicing law. And I had, at that point, Molly, my daughter, was born in 1997. So she was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old during all of that.
Yeah, not self-sufficient.
No. So, and she was not at my home all of the time, but she was at my home part of the time. And so, yes, that was, it was all a challenge. And I need to say that, Holly, she did it with dignity, and she, I don't know how to even put it into words. I mean, she just put on a game face and went through procedure after procedure after procedure. And I remember at one point, well into her cancer story, a year and a half into her cancer story, we were in a hospital room, and in the hospital rooms, they have the pain chart of 0 to 10, and they'll come in and ask you, what is your pain? And her answer would always be a 3. She might say a 4. And at one point, her oncologist really cross-examined her about whether she was telling the truth about her pain. And she finally confessed that she didn't feel compelled to tell them how much pain she was in. And I share this to say, she was just really just trying to manage this and do this in a way that was putting pressure on herself, I think, and also underestimating her pain. And then, I remember her doctors all getting together and thinking, we've really got to do something differently here, because she's been under disclosing the amount of pain.
You think she did that to protect you?
I don't know. I don't know. I do remember, and I thought of this today, and this is a little bit hard to talk about, but I remember her saying to me, it's harder for you to watch me go through this than it is for me to go through it. And I don't believe that, because I can't comfortably give blood because I'm squeamish about medical procedures. And I've never been overnighted in the hospital, never, right? And I would have no problem telling them my pain was a 10 times 10. I wouldn't be able to handle that. So I think that I had the better end of the circumstance.
Well, they're both awful.
But they both have their,
So because you said the cancer was slow, that people lived with it. I mean, to me, 4 years doesn't sound like a long time.
No. And thank you for bringing me back to that. Again, my conclusion is that she had this cancer for a while. And she had been diagnosed with rosacea, I think 11 years prior to that. And I think that might have been the beginning of the carcinoid syndrome. And it may be the case that she lived with carcinoid syndrome for 15 years without any treatment. And then it was so slow growing that it really didn't intensify until those last 4 years, right?
So I'm just trying to think. You're in a new marriage,
right?
You found this wonderful, a new Holly, this wonderful woman, and you've got your whole life before you. And I'm sure Molly was thrilled to have a new, stepmommy, and y'all are making a life. You bought a house, all the wonderful things, and you're in the prime of your life. You're in your 40s. I
was in my late 30s at the beginning of it.
You're just getting to I know with practice and law, you're getting to the point that you're good at it and you're developing your own clientele and your own practice and making partner and all these really exciting events that happen in your 40s. And Holly is so desperately, desperately ill. Right. So what was going on for you? Besides trying to take care of her?
So I became just sort of focused. I just focused. And I'm going to try to give you a trajectory, I guess, for me. For the first 2+ years, maybe a full 3 years, I was very, very focused on learning about her diagnosis, calling my doctor friends with whom I went to college to try to understand everything that the doctors were saying, and just trying to manage it. And I had a lot of help. People at the church brought food all the time during that long period. Her family, Holly has 4 siblings, and both of her parents were living at that time. They were constantly visiting and helping, so there was a lot of help. But it was, it became, you just figure out how to get through the day. You just figure out how to get through it. And, you don't stop to even let yourself go there, in terms of thinking about things, or you just keep that was my mode, just keep going, just keep putting one foot ahead of the other and one step after the other. And that was my mode for, like I said, nearly 3 years.
So you both had hope that y'all were going to get on the other side of this carcinoid and reclaim your life as a newly married couple and raise your daughter and enjoy your friends and just normalcy.
It didn't work that way. Yes, there was, how to put this? So Holly's perspective on this would be different than mine, justifiably. Holly dealt with it by, we were maybe dealing with it in similar ways in our own individual personalities for the first half of it. One step, like I said, just put on blinders and just do what you've got to do to get through the day. Holly, in addition to dealing with all the medical stuff, Holly signed up to go through training to become a Stephen minister during her cancer experience. I gently said, do you need to do this, right? And she needed to do that. That's what she needed to do. And that, from my perspective at the time, that gave her faith and hope that she would get through this and then have something to contribute as a Stephen minister based on, her experience and everything else in her life, right?
Well, she needed purpose outside of being
That's
sick.
exactly right. She wanted purpose and she needed purpose. And so that's what she did. We never got to a point where, they never said you're in remission. They said your liver looks better. Your liver is 60% clear. Your heart, whatever measures they used about how the heart valves process properly, right? It would be, it's better, but it's still this, right? There was never, you're going to permanently be okay. There was never that. It was, we're going to try to stabilize this and see how you can live successfully with what all of this entails. So and like I said, we had about a 6-month period where she had a normal life. And that was in 2006. We did a trip to Italy in 2006, and that felt really good. That 6 months felt really good. And I don't remember the timing in 2007, but at some point in early 2007, things took a turn. And it had come, there was more growth. There was more in her liver, and there was more also, I think, elsewhere in her stomach and digestive tract. So 2007, it became harder, and this part's hard for me to talk about, but this is the most realistic, or maybe truthful thing I can tell you. 2007 was when I began to question, what are we doing? And I had read a book, I think the writer was Stephen Levine, who wrote 1 Year to Live. And it's a book about how to think about how would you organize and prioritize your life if you knew you only had 1 year to live. And that caused me to reflect. It caused me to think about what she was going through. And then at around that time, the oncologist here in Atlanta who had been treating her just sort of ran out of options. And he told me privately, she's got, limited time. I don't know how much time, but months, not years, right? And we found a specialist in carcinoid syndrome who was in Tampa. And we went to see him, and he proposed some very experimental treatments. He proposed interferon, these things that were going to be very challenging and difficult for her to go through, and that didn't really, from my perspective, offer a promise of efficacy. And I'm a lawyer, and I cross-examined him in my own way, and I came to conclude that he saw Holly as a opportunity to gather data for his experiments, which are worthy and are valuable to have. I did not see faith on his part that his experiments were going to have a favorable outcome for her. I didn't perceive confidence on his part in that. And I perceived it was going to be very hard for her to continue, on that path. And so that was the hardest year of the 4 years. I, in my own way, raised with Holly, do you want to do this? Do you want to keep doing it this way? And in my experience, I wanted her and I wanted both of us just to be able to breathe out and enjoy whatever time was left, and maybe just bring real truth into the whole situation about what was real, what was really happening. And we had some conflict around that. And she said, you you want me to give up. You're what you're saying is I need to give up. And no, I'm not saying give up. I'm saying do life differently given what the last 3 years have been like and what this next regimen is going to look like. And that was just very, very hard. We never really completely resolved that until she later, went into hospice and there was more acceptance of her circumstance. And I still look back and I'm somewhat shameful and judgmental of myself for, pushing my view about it. At the same time, she had pushed herself and pushed and pushed and pushed and just put her body through so much. And she had armored herself. She had to. She had just armored herself physically, emotionally, psychologically to get through it. And it made it, from my perspective, where I was just exhausted and I just couldn't connect with her in the same way anymore because the armor was so fortified, And that was really hard. That was really hard.
But you were just both dealing with a horrendous situation. I mean, you said to me before when Holly finally passed and you were left with the house and your law practice and your daughter, you felt like you'd gone through post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just like, when we talk about trauma, I mean, you had been through your own personal trauma watching the woman you love fight and fight and fight and fight and not win.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, when it became clear, when she was referred to hospice, and it was late 2007, it may have been December of 2007. It was certainly by early January, she was under the care of hospice. She wanted to die at home, and that, I felt relief at that. I was very, very comfortable with the hospice community and the way their support was just truly remarkable. And I valued everything they brought to us. And I remember after 3 or 4 weeks, she was losing weight. I mean, this was just her body. I mean, it was just ravishing her body. And at times she would fall. And then it got to the point where she would fall and she couldn't pick herself up. And then it got to the point where I felt uncertain in my ability to care for her alone in her deteriorating state. And we made the decision, and she agreed to go to the hospice
Atlanta
community. It's near Lenox and Phipps.
It's not important. Yes, I know exactly what
You know
we're talking
exactly
about.
where we're talking about. So my memory of this is an ambulance came to my house, and an ambulance drove her to hospice, and I'm in my car following the ambulance from my house to hospice. And I just was bawling, crying as I was driving. And I thought, this isn't the way this is supposed to go, my life. And I knew she was not coming back to our house. This was just the beginning of the end, And I don't remember how many weeks she was at hospice, maybe a month. Yeah, she died on February 25th, so it may have been at least 4 or 5 weeks. And the hospice experience was sad, traumatic, beautiful, restorative. I mean, it had every piece of emotion you can name. I mean, Don Harp, so many people came and so many people brought their presence to her last days. And, what stands out for me now after all these years, and so many years, of course, have passed, is the challenge of watching her deteriorate and just how primal death can be. She was never a big person. She was a small person, but she lost at least half of her body weight, toward the end of her life. And it was very difficult to see her in that state. And at the very end, at the very, very end, when she passed, that last day, she had been, well, let me back up. For at least 2 or 3 days, she had been in and out of consciousness. And she would go to sleep, and then she would wake up and she would say, "You have no idea how many people are waiting for me. There are so many people who are so happy to see me coming." I would just sit on the edge of my seat and listen to her describe from what I was hearing, an experience on her part of communing with relatives and loved ones who had passed before. And she had a happiness about her in those moments that had been missing for a long, long time. And so those experiences were really remarkable. And that happened the last 2 or 3 or 4 days. But physically, she looked just depleted, to put it charitably, right? And she passed in the middle of a morning. It was morning, and I was with her. And when she passed, her eyes looked up, and her eyes had been red for weeks. Her eyes were bright. They were white. There was no redness in her eyes. Her face, her complexion normalized. She looked totally different. And her mouth was open. It was as if she had this expression of awe or wonder on her face. And she was looking up, and I was so moved by what clearly was her physical body taking in the experience of seeing the Holy Spirit, heaven, Jesus, all of the above, and it having a transformative effect on her physical body at the very, very end of her life in an observably material way. And even when the hospice folks and physicians came in, they stopped dead in their tracks at what they saw, the expression on her face. And that really meant a lot to me. And that said to me that, she's in a happier place.
So she finally, after all of that steel wall and putting up her armor and the untouchableness that she garnered herself with, it sounds like she finally found peace.
I believe that she did. Certainly at the end. And I remember that either the mortician or somebody coming in and they said, we need you to excuse the room while we set the body. And I said, fine. And I walked out and I started making phone calls, and they came and found me and said, "We're finished. You can now come say your goodbyes." And I said, you don't get it. Whatever you've done, I don't want to see it, because I've had my experience of her leaving, and it was remarkable,
So as the folks that are watching, I'm guessing are going to be people like you who have experienced a traumatic loss. And the loss of Holly is coupled with many things. One is that y'all were newly married and just starting a life together. And
we were cheated.
You were cheated.
We were cheated.
You were cheated. And she was so young. But at the end, I guess the hope is that there was really something that she, nobody knows because we hadn't done it, that at the end that you really do get to see God face to face.
Oh, I think that's right. And that feeling that I had with her, what I've described happened to her physically in connection with her passing. I mean, that stayed with me for a little while. But the year or two following her death was really still very, very, very hard. It was.
Well, I want to, as we start to end our discussion, one last thing I want us to touch on, because we touched on it before you and I sat down here to talk, is the process of grief. And you said something that I thought was so salient. You're like, grief, for at least you, and I don't think most people, was not a linear process. And so talk about that for a minute, because I'm imagining the folks that want to learn something from this recording are going through their own experience of grief.
Oh, where to begin? So I read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who has written about the stages of grief. That was really helpful. I went through all of those stages. I didn't go through them like a straight line. I kept having remedial training, I guess, because I kept going back through some of the same things. I remember, what stands out for me now is I remember in the weeks after she passed, there was this sense of relief on my part that I was no longer watching her physically deteriorate. There was this sense of relief that I was not in the middle of this, how do I fix this? And this intractable thing that I couldn't fix. And then I felt tremendous shame and guilt for having that sense of relief. And I didn't know how to deal with that. And that relief didn't last, but the shift from her being there and what we were dealing with before she was gone to what I was dealing with after she was gone was most immediately, how do I have all this free time? Even though I was a partner in a law firm and I had plenty of other things, my life had been so consumed with all of the management of the medical circumstances that I did not know what the real world was like without having that. And I had to find my way. That took a while. And adapting to an empty house and it was really a process that was not a straight line. And I think it was a few years. I mean, it was 3 or 4 years before it was 2 years before I felt like I had come out of something and was in a better place. And it was 3 or 4 years, I think, before I felt like, maybe I'm normal, maybe.
You're normal. I know you. First of all, thank you so much. Thank you for being you, and thank you for being honest and vulnerable. And as I told Joel before we sat down, I said, the point of this is to normalize the conversation. Sadly, every last one of us is going to lose somebody dear and precious. And while it may just seem like another passing for the person for whom you were so connected to leave your life is a major traumatic event. And we all have those feelings, and we can feel very alone and not know exactly how to deal with the swarming of emotions. And so I'm grateful to you because I know this is helpful to others who are experiencing a similar life event. And I'm grateful to everybody that supports the One Land ministry here at Peachtree Road. It has been a wonderful journey of people who are coming forward to educate and to tell stories of redemption and how they deal with their own emotional difficulties, because it's something we're all experiencing at some level at all times. We give thanks for your time and for everyone that participates in this important ministry.
Thanks for having me.